The year is 1889, and the ancient city of Turin lies shrouded in the grip of winter's final embrace. Snow falls in thick, silent curtains against the amber glow of gas lamps, their light fracturing through frosted windows like memories half remembered. The cobblestones of Via Carlo Alberto glisten beneath a thin sheet of ice, and somewhere in the distance a church bell tolls the lonely hour with a sound that seems to dissolve before it fully forms, much like the thoughts that visit you now in the sanctuary of your darkened room. In a modest apartment overlooking this sleeping city, a man sits hunched over his writing desk, his fingers trembling not from cold but from the terrible weight of consciousness itself. Friedrich Nietzsche, philosopher, prophet, and ultimately casualty of his own relentless pursuit of truth. His eyesight fails him, migraines split his skull like lightning, his body betrays him daily. Yet his mind burns with an intensity that would, within days, consume him entirely. He writes by candlelight, each flickering shadow on the wall a reminder of how fragile the boundary is between illumination and darkness, between sanity and the abyss that calls to all who dare to think too deeply. You know this feeling, don't you? You who lie there now, separated from him by more than a century, but united in the peculiar torment of consciousness that refuses to rest. Your mind, like his, has become both cathedral and prison, a place where profound insights and devastating anxieties dance together in the small hours of the night. Tonight we will not study Nietzsche from a distance. We will walk beside him through the snow-covered streets of his final lucid days, letting his madness become a mirror for your own restlessness. His questions an echo of your unspoken fears. In the labyrinth of his philosophy you may find not answers, but something far more valuable. The strange peace that comes from knowing you are not alone in your beautiful, terrible awareness of what it means to be human. We begin in the hush between breaths. In that fragile interval, when the day has surrendered but your mind refuses to follow. Around you, the room exists in shadow and suggestion, objects fading into darkness while thoughts burn with unwelcome clarity. The glow of screens has finally died, yet behind your closed eyes a different kind of light persists, the relentless illumination of consciousness that will not be dimmed. You feel it now, don't you? That peculiar heaviness that settles not on your body but within it, the crushing gravity of existence itself, the weight of being a creature who cannot help but think. Friedrich Nietzsche knew this burden intimately. In his letters, penned by trembling candlelight in the boarding houses of Europe, he confessed that thinking had become a form of illness, a fever that consumed him from within. He described himself as being crushed by the responsibility of thought, overwhelmed by what he called his intellectual conscience, that merciless inner voice that refused to accept comfortable lies or inherited wisdom without examination. While others slept peacefully in their certainties, Nietzsche lay awake, his mind a battlefield where every assumption about meaning, morality, and purpose came under relentless scrutiny. His migraines split his skull like lightning, his stomach churned with anxiety, his eyes failed him from strain. Yet still he could not stop the machinery of deep thought that ground away at easy answers until only raw questions remained. This is what Nietzsche termed the spirit of gravity, that invisible force that drags the thinking soul downward into the dense atmosphere of genuine inquiry. It is not mere melancholy or clinical depression, though it may wear those masks. It is something more fundamental, the natural consequence of possessing a mind that cannot skim the surface of existence, that must dive deep even when the depths offer no comfort. You carry this same weight. All day you perform the elaborate theatre of normalcy, smiling when expected, producing when required, presenting a version of yourself that the world finds acceptable. But here, in the sanctuary of darkness, the performance ends and you are left alone with the raw truth of your condition. Consider the architecture of your exhaustion. You are not simply tired from physical exertion. If that were so, sleep would claim you the moment your head touched the pillow. No, your fatigue is ancient and profound. The weariness of the observer who notices the slight change in a friend's tone and dissects it for hours, who feels the vibration of future catastrophes before they arrive, who replays the past like a detective searching for clues to an unsolvable crime. This is the scholar's burden, to be awake when the rest of the world is content to sleep in comfortable ignorance. But listen carefully, you who are weary from the labor of consciousness. This weight you carry, this anxiety that feels like a malfunction, is actually evidence of your depth. A shallow vessel holds no water, a shallow mind bears no real burden. Your heaviness is the price of your capacity for genuine thought, authentic feeling, and moral seriousness. Nietzsche would recognize you as kindred, one of those rare souls willing to bear the weight of existence rather than flee into destruction. Tonight, we will not attempt to cure you of your depth, but rather explore it together, following his path through the darkness toward something resembling wisdom. There exists a particular species of terror that visits you in the hollow hours before dawn. Not the fear of any specific catastrophe, but something more fundamental. The vertigo of standing at the edge of an infinite void where once there was solid ground. You feel it now, don't you? That peculiar weightlessness in your chest, as if the invisible scaffolding that once supported human existence has quietly dissolved, leaving you suspended in a cosmos that offers no inherent direction, no cosmic parent watching over the fragile theatre of your life. When Friedrich Nietzsche placed his famous words into the mouth of a madman running through the marketplace with a lit lantern in broad daylight, he was not celebrating a victory, but announcing a catastrophe. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. The crowd mocked the prophet, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what had occurred. But Nietzsche understood, with trembling clarity, that Western civilization had severed its connection to the transcendent frameworks that once provided meaning, purpose, and moral orientation. He saw that we had killed not merely a theological concept, but the entire architecture of certainty itself. And he wept for what would follow. You live in the emotional aftermath of this death. Your anxiety is not personal failure, but cultural inheritance. Consider how your grandparents moved through the world. They married young because that was what one did. They chose from a limited menu of acceptable careers. They attended services weekly and found in ritual a rhythm that sanctified suffering and organized time. Their lives were constrained, yes, but constraint provided a kind of peace. The walls were also guardrails. The limitations were also liberations from the tyranny of infinite choice. But you wake each morning into a wilderness of possibility that masquerades as freedom. Which career among 10,000 options? Which identity among countless permutations? Which values when every moral system seems arbitrary, constructed, contingent? You scroll through social media and witness 1,000 different ways to live, each one simultaneously validated and invalidated by the crowd's fickle attention. The old gods of tradition, authority, and collective wisdom have indeed perished, and in their absence you are left to navigate by stars you must chart yourself. This is the source of your 3 o'clock anxiety, the reason your mind races when your body begs for rest. You are not merely choosing what to wear or which path to pursue, you are inventing the very criteria by which such choices should be made. You are authoring not just your life, but the philosophical framework that determines what constitutes a good life. This is exhausting labor. This constant creation of meaning from the void. No wonder you lie awake, paralyzed by decisions that previous generations never had to consciously make. Yet within this terrifying diagnosis, Nietzsche glimpsed something else. A possibility that emerges only after certainty has been stripped away. If no external authority dictates your purpose, then you become the author of your own meaning. If no inherited script determines your path, then you possess the terrible and beautiful freedom to write your own story. The vertigo you feel is not evidence of cosmic abandonment, but the birth pang of authentic choice. Tonight, as you drift in this space between waking and sleeping, consider that your groundlessness might also be your liberation. You are not broken because you cannot find comfort in the old answers. You are awake in a universe that has become, perhaps for the first time in human history, genuinely open to your own creative response. Your body has been composing a letter to you in the only language it knows, the alphabet of sensation, the grammar of tension and release. Right now, as you seek the sanctuary of sleep, notice how it speaks, the tightness gathering in your jaw like a secret you cannot tell, the shallow breath that never quite reaches the bottom of your lungs, the restless electricity that courses through your limbs just as consciousness begins to fade. Perhaps there is that familiar ache behind your eyes, the weight pressing down upon your chest, the way your stomach churns with anxiety that has no clear name or object. You have been taught to see these sensations as enemies, malfunctions in the machinery of self that must be silenced, medicated, or overcome through sheer determination. Friedrich Nietzsche knew this territory with cruel intimacy. His philosophy was not written from the comfort of academic halls, but from the edge of a sickbed, forged in the fires of relentless physical torment. Chronic migraines split his skull like lightning for days at a time, leaving him vomiting and half-blind in darkened rooms. His digestion failed him so completely that he survived on a handful of bland foods, consumed with medicinal precision. Insomnia stretched his nights into endless corridors of consciousness, forcing him to rely on dangerous sedatives for even brief respites. His eyesight crumbled, his nerves became hypersensitive to weather, sound, and light. He tried every cure, the water therapies, the mountain air, the desperate relocations from city to city in search of climate that might grant him peace. Nothing worked. His body remained what he called a faithful enemy, reminding him daily that he was not pure spirit, but animal flesh subject to decay and rebellion. Yet from this crucible of suffering emerged a radical insight that might offer you solace tonight. Nietzsche came to understand the body not as a broken machine to be fixed, but as what he termed the great reason, a source of wisdom far deeper and more ancient than the chattering conscious mind. He argued that our little reason, the intellect that worries and analyzes, is merely a toy compared to the immense intelligence of embodied existence. When your chest tightens before social gatherings, when your shoulders carry invisible weight, when sleep refuses to come despite exhaustion. This is not malfunction, but message. Your body is the most honest philosopher you will ever encounter. It refuses to lie about your condition. Consider now the possibility that your physical symptoms are not obstacles to overcome, but messengers bearing vital intelligence from your deepest self. Perhaps your insomnia is not disease, but protest against a life that feels misaligned with your nature. Perhaps the tension you carry is the somatic weight of burdens that were never truly yours to bear. Nietzsche learned to listen to his pain, letting it guide him away from climates, people, and ideas that made him sick and toward those that restored his vitality. He transformed suffering into a tool for navigation, a compass pointing toward authentic existence. So tonight, as you lie there in the darkness, cease waging war against your own flesh. Extend compassionate curiosity toward these sensations. Acknowledge that your body is trying, in its ancient and wordless way, to protect you. It is alert because it loves you. It is tense because it believes you are in danger. Thank it for its vigilance and whisper gently that the danger has passed. The great reason of your body can finally rest. There exists a threshold in the architecture of consciousness, a subtle boundary that separates contemplation from consumption. You know this territory intimately, that moment when innocent curiosity transforms into something more dangerous, when the mind becomes a hall of mirrors reflecting endlessly inward. What begins as a simple question about your purpose or an examination of past mistakes gradually deepens into gravitational pull, drawing you toward an invisible center where thoughts multiply and spiral until the original inquiry is lost entirely in the labyrinth of self-analysis. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this descent with agonizing clarity, offering his most haunting warning for souls like yours who are drawn to the depths. When you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. This was not poetic flourish, but lived experience. Wisdom earned through his own dangerous journeys into the caverns of radical questioning.
He knew that the same intellectual courage that allows you to pierce comfortable illusions can become a weapon turned against yourself, that the analytical mind capable of profound insight can also dissect joy until nothing remains but sterile components. You recognize this experience in your own midnight hours, the way a single worry metastasizes into comprehensive catastrophe, how examining your anxiety produces more anxiety about being anxious, creating an Ouroboros of self-consciousness consuming its own tail.
You analyze relationships until spontaneity dies, dissect career choices until ambition dissolves into paralysis. Examine your own thoughts with such forensic intensity that thinking itself becomes exhausting. This is the abyss gazing back, the point where introspection transforms from tool into tyrant, from method of self-knowledge into mode of self-torture. Nietzsche distinguished between two kinds of inner exploration. There is the courageous descent of the philosopher, who enters the depths to illuminate and return with insight. And there is the obsessive circling of the sufferer, who hovers anxiously at the edge of every question, afraid to let anything remain undecided, yet too exhausted to follow any path to resolution. The difference is crucial. Reflection asks, what can I learn from this? While rumination demands, what if this ruins everything? Reflection opens a window, rumination locks you in a room with no door. The philosopher's prescription was what he called intellectual hygiene, knowing when to think and when to cease thinking, when to analyze and when to simply inhabit experience without commentary. He spent mornings writing with furious intensity, but afternoons walking in mountain air, deliberately silencing the analytical mind and becoming nothing more than a body moving through landscape. He understood that consciousness requires rest as surely as muscles require recovery between exertions. Tonight, as you feel your mind beginning its familiar descent into the spiral of overthinking, recognize this as a choice point. You can continue gazing into the abyss, or you can gently turn your attention elsewhere, to breath moving through your body, to the weight of blankets against skin, to the distant sounds of the world outside your window. Give yourself permission to stop the excavation. You have analyzed enough, mapped the contours of worry with exhaustive precision. The questions will remain tomorrow, tonight. Let the abyss close its eyes and rest. Within the theatre of your consciousness, a trial has been perpetually in session since you first learned to read disappointment in a parent's eyes, to measure your worth against the invisible scales of social approval. Even now, as you seek refuge in darkness, the courtroom remains crowded with spectators. Teachers whose standards colonized your inner voice. Peers whose casual judgments carved channels of shame through your psyche. Society's relentless proclamations about success, normalcy, and worthiness. The prosecutor never rests, presenting evidence of your inadequacies with merciless precision. Yesterday's awkward silence, the project left unfinished. The way you failed to perform the elaborate choreography of being effortlessly confident, perpetually productive, universally beloved. Friedrich Nietzsche gazed into this tribunal of human judgment and recognized it as one of history's most sophisticated forms of tyranny. In his exploration of what lies beyond good and evil, he unveiled a disturbing truth. Much of what we call morality is actually the crystallized preferences of power, inherited systems of control disguised as cosmic law. Those who possessed strength in ancient times declared their own qualities good, courage, pride, self-assertion, while condemning the characteristics of the powerless as evil. Later, in what Nietzsche termed a slave revolt in morality, the oppressed inverted these values, declaring meekness, self-denial, and suffering virtuous while casting strength and ambition as sinful. Neither system reflected universal truth. Both served to maintain existing hierarchies through the elegant mechanism of internalized judgment. You live within the emotional archaeology of these power struggles. Consider how much of your anxiety stems not from genuine moral concern, but from inherited expectations that may actively oppose your flourishing. The shame you feel about setting boundaries, the guilt that accompanies your need for solitude, the terror of disappointing others even when their demands wound your nature. These are not your authentic conscience speaking, but ancient voices from systems designed to keep you compliant, productive, and small. When you lie awake replaying social interactions, agonizing over whether you said the right thing, you are performing someone else's script, following rules written by people who never knew your soul. The liberation Nietzsche offers is not the abandonment of ethics, but the courage to distinguish between values you have authentically chosen and those you have merely absorbed. Some of the judgments you carry may indeed reflect your deepest commitments to kindness, integrity, and growth. Others are simply debris from a culture that needed you manageable rather than magnificent. Your sensitivity is not weakness requiring correction, but a sophisticated instrument of perception. Your desire for depth over superficial connection is not antisocial behavior, but evidence of your refusal to live on the surface of existence. Tonight, as you rest beneath the weight of invisible verdicts, imagine the courtroom gradually emptying. One by one, the spectators stand and depart, not because you have proven your innocence, but because you have recognized they possess no legitimate authority over your existence.
The trial is adjourned. You are released into the radical responsibility of authoring your own values, freed from the exhausting performance of perpetual justification. In this darkness beyond praise and blame, you are simply human, flawed, unfinished, and already worthy of peace. There exists a peculiar venom that seeps into your bloodstream each time you illuminate that small rectangle of curated lives, a toxin more insidious than any physical ailment because it masquerades as moral clarity.
You feel it now, don't you? Even with the device face down beside you, that residual tightness in your chest from today's digital encounters. The bitter aftertaste of witnessing others' triumphs, while your own life feels perpetually incomplete. It begins innocently enough, a casual scroll through celebrations, achievements, perfect moments frozen in amber. But notice what happens in the secret chemistry of your soul. Admiration curdles into envy. Envy disguises itself as righteous judgment. And suddenly you find yourself cataloguing the flaws of those who seem to possess what you lack. Friedrich Nietzsche identified this psychological mechanism with surgical precision, naming it ressentiment, a French term he preserved to capture its unique flavor of festering grievance. Unlike honest anger that burns bright and dissipates, ressentiment is patient, cold, and corrosive. It is the emotion of those who cannot directly challenge what they envy, and so instead perform a subtle alchemy of values. Unable to achieve conventional success, they declare success shallow. Unable to feel effortless joy, they sanctify their suffering. Unable to be beautiful, they proclaim beauty meaningless. This inversion allows them to feel superior while remaining wounded, righteous while nursing the very jealousy they refuse to acknowledge. In our age of algorithmic attention, this ancient poison has been industrialized. The machinery that governs your digital consumption is designed to generate envy, presenting an endless parade of lives that appear more coherent, meaningful, and abundant than your own fragmented existence. Each curated image arrives as a small theft, stealing your gratitude, your sense of sufficiency, your peace with your own unfolding story. You begin to define yourself by what you lack rather than what you possess, measuring your intricate, messy reality against the polished surfaces of others' public presentations. But here is where the poison does its most sophisticated work. Because you are intelligent and self-aware, you recognize the envy rising within you and immediately feel ashamed of feeling envious, creating what Nietzsche would recognize as a secondary layer of suffering about your suffering. Rather than acknowledge your longing directly, you begin to critique. Their success probably came from privilege you lacked. Their happiness seems performative. Their choices reflect values you consider shallow. You transform your pain into moral superiority, your wound into weapon, becoming defined not by your own creative force, but by your opposition to those you secretly wish to emulate. Nietzsche's antidote was what he called noble emotion, feeling that arises from internal abundance rather than reactive comparison. The noble soul can witness others' joy without diminishment because their worth is not measured on a competitive scale. They look forward toward their own potential rather than sideways to see who is ahead or behind. Tonight, as you release the day's accumulated comparisons, imagine this poison draining from your system like fever breaking. Those figures on the screens, they too lie awake with doubts, they too struggle with the gap between appearance and experience. In this darkness beyond judgment, you are freed from the exhausting labor of measurement, returned to the simple truth of your own becoming. There exists a peculiar exhaustion that comes not from what you have accomplished, but from what remains perpetually undared, a fatigue born of energy turned inward upon itself, like a river dammed until it becomes stagnant pool rather than flowing current. You feel it now, don't you, beneath the familiar weight of anxiety, that sense of being a passenger in your own existence, watching life unfold around you while some essential force within remains trapped, unexpressed, slowly consuming itself in the endless loop of worry and anticipation. Your sleeplessness is not mere restlessness, but the rebellion of a vital energy that has nowhere constructive to flow. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this condition with painful intimacy. Here was a man whose body betrayed him daily, racked by migraines that left him vomiting in darkened rooms, plagued by digestive ailments that reduced his diet to a few bland necessities, his eyesight failing, his nervous system so hypersensitive that weather changes sent him fleeing from city to city in search of relief. He knew powerlessness in its most visceral form, the humiliation of a brilliant mind trapped in rebellious flesh. Yet from this crucible of physical helplessness emerged his most profound insight, that true power has nothing to do with external dominance and everything to do with mastery over one's own responses to an uncontrollable world. When Nietzsche spoke of der Wille Macht, the will to power, he was not advocating the tyrannical domination that history has tragically associated with his name. Such crude interpretations would have appalled him. No, he meant something far more subtle and ultimately more radical, the fundamental life force that drives every organism toward growth, self-overcoming, and creative expression. It is the sap pushing through concrete, the artist wresting meaning from chaos, the human spirit's refusal to accept meaninglessness even in the face of cosmic indifference. This will to power pulses within you, even now, especially now, in your darkest and most uncertain hours. Your anxiety is this life force turned against itself, the energy you spend catastrophizing, rehearsing conversations, imagining disasters. This is your will to power, desperately seeking expression, but finding only the futile project of controlling an uncontrollable future. Your racing mind is not evidence of weakness, but of a consciousness frantically trying to assert agency in the only way it knows how. You exhaust yourself not from lack of vitality, but from pouring that vitality into impossible tasks, managing others' opinions, predicting economic forces, orchestrating outcomes that lie beyond any individual's influence. The liberation Nietzsche offers is a radical redirection of this energy from external circumstances to internal responses. You cannot control whether others approve of your choices, but you can control how much authority you grant their judgment. You cannot control the job market, but you can control how you respond to rejection. You cannot eliminate anxiety, but you can choose whether anxiety dictates your actions. This is active power, flowing from your own center outward rather than reactive power that defines itself only in opposition to what it fears. When you choose breath over panic, forgiveness over self-attack, one small authentic action over endless planning, you are exercising your deepest nature. Tonight, feel this will to power not as something you must acquire, but as something you have never lost, only forgotten how to direct. Let its first gentle expression be the choice to release what cannot be solved in darkness, to surrender control over tomorrow's uncertainties. Even rest is an act of sovereignty. a quiet assertion of your right to peace. There exists a peculiar form of exhaustion that arrives not from living too intensely, but from living too softly. A fatigue born not of great exertion, but of great avoidance. You feel it now, don't you? Beneath the familiar weight of another day dissolved into comfortable distractions. The strange emptiness after hours of scrolling through curated lives. The weightless dizziness that follows yet another evening of numbing yourself with noise and light. The dull ache of existing without truly living. Your body rests in safety, your basic needs are met, and yet something within you quietly suffocates, gasping for air in the padded cell of modern comfort. Friedrich Nietzsche gazed into the future and witnessed a vision that filled him with horror more profound than any physical agony he endured. He called this figure the last man, not humanity's final evolutionary form, but its most diminished incarnation. This creature has solved the problem of human suffering through the elegant solution of making suffering impossible. He has eliminated risk, smoothed away every sharp edge of existence, and engineered a life of perfect, frictionless contentment. We have invented happiness, the last man proclaims, and then he blinks, not once but repeatedly, because his eyes can no longer tolerate the brilliant intensity of genuine passion or profound sorrow. You recognize him in your own midnight habits, don't you? He is the voice that whispers after a bruising day when the world feels too demanding, too sharp, too real. He suggests just one more episode, 10 more minutes of scrolling, another small distraction to blur the edges of your dissatisfaction. Your smartphone has become his ultimate tool, a device engineered to ensure you never endure a moment of boredom, loneliness, or authentic silence. Each notification is a gentle anesthetic, each swipe a soft retreat from the beautiful difficulty of being fully present to your own existence. But consider the price of this anesthetized life. When you systematically eliminate risk, you also eliminate the possibility of triumph. When you numb your capacity for sadness, you simultaneously dull your ability to experience joy. The last man is last because he represents the end of human becoming. He has stopped striving, stopped overcoming, stopped growing. He is content, yes, but it is the contentment of a well-fed pet rather than the vibrant peace of a soul that has wrestled with its demons and emerged transformed. Here lies a profound paradox. Your very anxiety might be the part of you that refuses to become the last man. Your sleeplessness could be your spirit's rebellion against a life of comfortable drift toward oblivion. That restless energy keeping you awake, it is not malfunction, but message. Your deeper self insisting that you were made not merely to be safe, but to be alive. Not just to survive, but to become. Tonight, distinguish between two kinds of rest. There is the restoration that rejuvenates your capacity for growth, and there is the numbing that merely pauses time, suspending you in comfortable limbo. Your insomnia itself may be wisdom, your soul's refusal to sleep through a life that demands your full presence. In this darkness, allow yourself to feel the raw texture of existence without reaching for the screen to blur it away. These sensations, the worry, the longing, the ache, are proof that something within you still burns, still refuses the last man's gentle suffocation. There exists within the architecture of your soul a capacity for transformation so profound that it requires not one but three distinct deaths and rebirths, a sacred progression that Friedrich Nietzsche mapped with the tenderness of one who had walked this path through his own dark nights. Tonight, as you lie suspended between consciousness and surrender, you are invited to witness your own metamorphosis, to recognize which form you currently inhabit and what liberation awaits in the gentle dissolution of who you think you must be. First comes the camel, and you know this creature with aching intimacy because you have embodied it all day, perhaps all year, perhaps your entire life. The camel is the spirit that kneels in the desert sand and asks, "What is the heaviest thing I can bear?" It seeks out weight, responsibility, obligation, loading itself with others' expectations, society's demands, the accumulated shoulds and musts that define worthiness. You have been this noble beast, carrying family disappointments like stones in your chest, shouldering career ambitions that were never authentically yours, bearing the impossible burden of making everyone comfortable with your existence. The camel finds meaning in endurance, proving its value through how much it can carry without complaint. Yet notice the profound exhaustion in your bones. This is the weight of a life defined entirely by what it bears rather than what it is. But something stirs in the desert's heat. The camel, crushed beneath burdens that have lost all meaning, undergoes a violent transformation and becomes the lion. This second metamorphosis arrives when you finally roar "I will" against the world's insistent "thou shalt." The lion is the spirit of sacred rebellion, the force that questions every inherited value and fights for freedom from the weight it once willingly bore. You have felt this lion stirring during those moments of anger at systems that diminish you, those flashes of defiance when you almost spoke your truth, those midnight hours when you dared imagine a life not dictated by others' scripts. The lion creates space through destruction, saying no to everything that constrains authentic existence. Yet for all its magnificent strength, the lion remains reactive, defined by what it opposes rather than what it creates, still bound to the very authorities it battles. And so the final, most mysterious transformation must occur. In the aftermath of the lion's roar, in the cleared space where old values once stood, something emerges that Nietzsche called the child. This is not regression to naivety, but arrival at a new innocence, the capacity to create values from your own center. To approach existence not as problem requiring solution, but as game inviting participation. The child is forgetting and beginning, a self-propelled wheel, a holy yes to life. It carries no resentment for burdens once borne, no bitterness toward authorities once defied. The child simply plays with whatever materials existence provides, finding wonder in the ordinary, creating meaning through the sheer act of engaged presence. Tonight, you who have carried so much and fought so hard, consider this final metamorphosis. What would it mean to release the need to be strong enough, successful enough, normal enough? In this darkness beyond judgment, you can become the child who has always lived within you, waiting for permission to emerge. Let the camel rest its weary legs. Let the lion's roar fade into silence. What remains is simple breath, innocent wonder, and the peaceful dissolution into sleep as the ultimate act of trust. There exists a quiet tragedy that haunts your sleepless hours. The sense that you are living adjacent to your own life, orbiting the person you might have been if fear, obligation, and comparison had not intervened. You feel it as a subtle dissonance, don't you? The distance between what you do and what you are, between the carefully curated mask you present to the world and the original pattern that existed before the world taught you to become someone more palatable, more productive, more easily categorized. Tonight, as you lie suspended between consciousness and surrender, you carry the peculiar exhaustion of one who has spent the day performing an elaborate ensemble cast within a single fragile body. Friedrich Nietzsche gave a name to the one who overcomes this dissonance, though his concept has been so catastrophically misunderstood that we must first dismantle the intimidating statue history has erected in its place. When you hear Übermensch, often mistranslated as Superman, you perhaps imagine a figure of steel and certainty, devoid of doubt, anxiety, or fragility. You measure your own tired, worried self against this impossible standard and find only another reason to feel inadequate. But let us gently correct this distortion. Nietzsche's Übermensch is not a dominating tyrant or genetic superior, but something far more intimate and revolutionary. A human being who has simply overcome their smaller, fearful self to embrace their own unique nature without apology. You have spent so many years in exile from yourself, haven't you? Carefully calibrating your personality to match each context. The version who appears at family gatherings, the professional mask you wear to meetings, the curated self you present to potential partners. The performance of effortless normalcy you maintain even when anxiety tears through you like storm winds. Each day fractures under the pressure of conflicting demands. To be ambitious yet relaxed, independent yet endlessly available, unique yet never disruptive. No wonder you feel exhausted. Maintaining this elaborate choreography consumes vast quantities of psychic energy, leaving you depleted yet unable to rest, because the fear of being found out keeps the mind vigilant. Consider the possibility that your anxiety is not a malfunction but a messenger, the friction generated when your soul rubs against a life that doesn't quite fit. Your sleeplessness might be your spirit's rebellion against the exhausting labor of pretending. Your deeper self insisting that you were made not merely to perform acceptability, but to transmit the unique frequency that is authentically yours. The sensitivity you have learned to apologize for might be your greatest gift. Your need for solitude, which society labels antisocial, might be the necessary condition for your creativity. Your tendency toward melancholy, which wellness culture pathologizes, might be the depth that allows you to perceive beauty invisible to shallower souls. Nietzsche's invitation, "Become who you are," is not a command to transform yourself into someone better, stronger, or more impressive. It is an archaeological project, the patient work of excavating the irreducible essence that was always yours before fear convinced you to hide it beneath layers of acceptable performance. This requires stripping away everything that is not you, the accumulated conditioning, the values adopted out of fear rather than conviction, the metrics you did not choose, numbers in bank accounts, titles on business cards, the silent scoreboard of social approval. The Übermensch is simply someone who has ceased this exhausting performance and dared to author their own values from the depths of authentic experience. They have looked into the mirror of their own soul and accepted what they found there, without adding, "and I'm sorry." They have realized that the goal of life is not to meet an external standard of perfection, but to fully express the singular phenomenon that is their own existence. This is not narcissistic self-indulgence, but the most difficult spiritual labor, distinguishing between the voice of your genuine nature and the internalized chorus of authorities who colonized your consciousness before you could defend yourself. Tonight, as you rest in darkness beyond the world's gaze, imagine what Nietzsche called radical self-friendship. The courage to say, "This is who I am," without apology. Picture yourself shedding each mask, each performance, each carefully constructed version of acceptable selfhood. What remains when no one is watching, when no judgment threatens, when the need to be anything other than what you are finally dissolves? That quiet, breathing presence, flawed, unfinished, impossibly unique, is the Übermensch you were always meant to become. Not superior to others, but finally, blessedly superior to the false versions of yourself that kept you imprisoned in perpetual performance. In this acceptance lies the deepest rest of all. There exists a thought so profound that Friedrich Nietzsche claimed it could either crush the human spirit entirely or elevate it to heights of existential courage previously unimaginable. Tonight, as you lie suspended between consciousness and surrender, between this day's accumulated worries and tomorrow's uncertain promises, imagine that a figure approaches your bedside, not to comfort, but to pose the most beautiful and terrible question ever whispered to a restless soul. What if this life, exactly as you are living it now, with every anxiety attack and sleepless night, every moment of doubt and flash of joy, must be lived again and again, infinitely, without variation or escape? The demons speak softly. Every conversation you replay with shame will return in precisely the same sequence. Every failure that burns your cheeks with embarrassment will recur eternally. Every 3M spiral into catastrophic thinking. Every social interaction that left you feeling exposed and inadequate. Every day you spent scrolling mindlessly through others' curated lives, all of it returning endlessly like a cosmic record player with the needle stuck in the groove of your particular existence. Even this very moment, lying here seeking peace in darkness, will echo through eternity exactly as it is unfolding now. Your first instinct is horror, isn't it? The anxious mind that keeps you awake is woven from two threads: the past you cannot change and the future you cannot control. You spend countless hours replaying scenes, searching for ways they might have gone differently, imagining how you could have been braver, wiser, more articulate. You project forward into disasters that may never arrive, rehearsing conversations with critics who exist only in your imagination. The idea that these torments would return infinitely seems like the cruelest possible fate, an eternal prison of your own psychological making. But stay with the thought, let it settle deeper. Nietzsche offered eternal recurrence not as metaphysical truth, but as the ultimate test of life affirmation. A spiritual instrument capable of transforming your relationship with every moment you have ever experienced. If this life will recur exactly as it was, then resistance becomes a form of infinite self-torture. Fighting against your own story becomes absurd when that story is eternal and unchangeable. The only psychologically sustainable response is radical acceptance. Not passive resignation, but active embrace of the totality. Consider how this dissolves the architecture of regret that keeps you awake. If every moment is inextricably linked to every other, then wishing away your anxiety means wishing away the sensitivity that allows you to perceive beauty others miss. To regret your failures is to regret the wisdom they eventually birthed. Your depression becomes the necessary crucible that forged your capacity for empathy. Your loneliness becomes the space that taught you to befriend yourself. Pull one thread from the tapestry of your existence, and the entire masterpiece unravels. Suddenly, this present moment, with its imperfections, its incomplete healing, its persistent worries, is no longer a rough draft requiring revision, but a finished work of art, complex and somehow complete exactly as it is. The weight of getting it right dissolves because there is nowhere else to arrive, no future version of yourself who will finally be fixed. There is only this eternal now, returning infinitely. So tonight, as sleep approaches, whisper this radical affirmation: yes, again. All of it, again. Not because every moment was pleasant, but because every moment was yours, and you would not trade your particular consciousness, anxious, sensitive, beautifully aware, for any other existence in the infinite cosmos. There exists a particular kind of war you have been waging for years, often without fully recognizing its scope. The quiet, relentless resistance to the simple fact that your life has unfolded exactly as it has. You lie here now, in the sanctuary of darkness, haunted not only by what has happened, but by what did not happen. The opportunities that slipped through your fingers, the versions of yourself that never emerged, the relationships that fractured before they could fully bloom, the paths that closed before you could walk them. Your restless mind replays these scenes like evidence in an eternal courtroom, building a case against reality itself, gathering proof that fate has somehow wronged you. Friedrich Nietzsche, who knew suffering in forms both crushing and sublime, offered a response so radical it sounds almost impossible at first hearing: amor fati. Not the grudging tolerance of your circumstances, not the bitter swallowing of disappointment, but genuine, passionate love for your entire destiny. My formula for greatness in a human being, he wrote from his own depths of physical agony and spiritual isolation, is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. To your anxious, wounded soul, this sounds like madness. How could you ever love the nights you could not stop trembling, the years that dissolved into numbness, the choices that still burn like open wounds in your chest? But consider the mathematics of your resistance. Every "this should not have happened" becomes a chain that binds you to the very pain you wish to escape. You lie awake not only re-experiencing old wounds, but fighting the fact that they exist at all, waging war against events that have already crystallized into history. Reality becomes a defendant in a trial that can never conclude in your favor, because the verdict you long for, that it should have been otherwise, is forever impossible. This is the most exhausting conflict a human consciousness can wage, the battle against what has already been written in the immutable book of your existence. Amor fati asks something subtler and more demanding than mere acceptance. It invites you to recognize the intricate interdependence of your experience, that just as mountains cannot exist without valleys, your capacity for profound joy is carved by the same chisel that carved your capacity for exquisite sorrow. Consider the events you most wish to erase. The relationship that collapsed and left you questioning your worthiness of love. The failure that shattered your confidence. The anxiety disorder that arrived uninvited and colonized your nervous system. What if these were not detours from your path, but the path itself? What if the person you are becoming, more honest, more tender, more attuned to the quiet sufferings of others, could not exist without exactly those devastations? Remove one thread from the tapestry of your existence, and the entire masterpiece changes shape. Your sensitivity, that quality you have learned to apologize for, was forged in the fires of experiences that demanded you develop instruments of perception more subtle than those required for easier lives. Your depth was hollowed out by events that carved space within you for wisdom that shallow contentment could never accommodate. Even your sleeplessness, this very moment when you seek solace in philosophy, might be the crucible that refined your awareness, forcing you to examine existence with an intensity that more comfortable souls never develop. Amor fati becomes an alchemical process, transforming the leaden weight of regret into something approaching golden gratitude. It does not ask you to pretend that everything was pleasant, just, or fair. It asks only that you recognize these experiences as inextricably woven into the singular phenomenon that is your consciousness. To love your fate is to love yourself completely, which means embracing even the chapters that nearly destroyed you, because they are the very chapters that created your capacity for this moment of contemplation. Tonight, as you rest in the quiet darkness, try this gentle practice of transformation. Instead of pushing away your current discomfort, the worry, the physical tension, the racing thoughts, welcome these sensations as textures of your unique fate. Notice how your body carries the residue of all that has been. The heart beneath your ribs has raced through panic and endured disappointment, yet still beats with steady courage. The breath that rises and falls was once caught on silent sobs, yet continues its patient rhythm of renewal. With each exhale, release the wish for a different past. With each inhale, allow the possibility that your story was enough, exactly as it unfolded. Whisper to your life, to all its imperfect chapters, I would not change you, even if I could. Feel the tremendous relief that comes from finally laying down the weapons you have been using to fight your own existence. In loving your fate completely, you become invincible, for nothing that happens can ever defeat someone who has already decided to embrace everything with the fierce tenderness of amor fati. There exists a particular species of loneliness that visits you not when you are merely alone, but precisely when you are being most authentically yourself. A profound isolation that persists even in crowded rooms, perhaps especially in crowded rooms, where you find yourself performing elaborate translations between your inner language and the dialect of acceptable social exchange. You know this territory intimately, don't you? The way conversations remain stubbornly tethered to surfaces while your mind dives toward deeper currents. The exhausting labor of editing your thoughts in real time so they won't overwhelm those who prefer to navigate existence with an ease that remains perpetually mysterious to your anxious, overthinking consciousness. Friedrich Nietzsche gave form to this exquisite alienation through his prophet Zarathustra, who descended from 10 years of mountain solitude carrying wisdom that burned in his chest like coals, only to discover that the marketplace crowds could not comprehend what he had learned in the thin air of high contemplation. They wanted entertainment, distraction, the tightrope walker's death-defying performance, not the difficult truths about self-overcoming and the death of comfortable certainties. Again and again, Nietzsche shows us the prophet's essential tragedy, that insight often purchases its clarity at the price of connection, that the same depth of perception which allows you to see beauty invisible to others also creates an unbridgeable chasm between your experience and theirs. You have lived this story in your own small, unheralded way. Perhaps you learned to dim your own light to make others comfortable, translating your complex inner world into simpler sentences so you won't be misunderstood. Holding back the full intensity of your perceptions because you've discovered they can rupture the delicate fabric of ordinary social life. This self-censorship becomes exhausting labor, a constant subtraction of your true self that leaves you feeling hollow even in the company of friends. You carry the secret fear that if you were to reveal the actual scope of your anxieties, the sheer magnitude of your feeling nature, you would find yourself utterly abandoned. But Nietzsche distinguished between two kinds of solitude: the poverty of isolation, which diminishes, and the richness of chosen aloneness, which nourishes. What he called the pathos of distance is not arrogance, but the natural separation that occurs when one refuses to settle for the common denominators of culture. Just as the air grows thinner at higher altitudes, so too does companionship become rarer for those who climb toward difficult truths. Your feeling of not fitting in is not evidence that you are broken. It is evidence that you are functioning exactly as a deep soul must in a shallow world. Your loneliness may be the necessary sanctuary where your most authentic thoughts can emerge without immediate need for defense or translation. In the silence of your room, away from the noise of social performance, you become free to hear the subtle whispers of your own intuition that are drowned out in the marketplace of everyday interaction. Tonight, as you rest in the quiet darkness that has become your familiar companion, recognize yourself as the prophet of your own existence, not abandoned, but finally, blessedly, in honest company with the one consciousness you can never escape. Your own deep, beautiful, irreducibly complex awareness. Your solitude is not exile, but patient waiting, a refusal to settle for connection that requires you to amputate essential parts of yourself. There exists a threshold where the elaborate fortress of thought finally crumbles, not from external assault, but from the gentle, devastating pressure of a heart that can no longer bear separation from the world's suffering. Picture now a grey January morning in Turin, 1889, where the Alpine cold has settled into the cobblestone streets like a held breath. The sky hangs low and colourless, dissolving the boundaries between earth and heaven into a muted haze that mirrors the exhaustion you carry tonight. Carriage wheels echo against ancient stones, their rhythm punctuating the weary heartbeat of a city awakening to another day of small cruelties and unnoticed pain. Friedrich Nietzsche emerges from his modest lodgings, his body already ravaged by years of migraines that split his skull like lightning, his nervous system so hypersensitive that he flees from city to city seeking climate that might grant him peace. At a nearby intersection, he witnesses a scene of ordinary brutality, a coachman beating his collapsed horse with methodical efficiency, the animal's eyes wide with the incomprehension that accompanies all innocent suffering. In that moment, something within the philosopher, some final barrier between intellect and feeling, simply dissolves. He rushes forward, throws his arms around the horse's neck, and collapses into uncontrollable weeping. This was not philosophical failure, but the ultimate triumph of what he had spent a lifetime trying to contain: his immense, unbearable capacity for compassion. The man who had written extensively about strength, who had criticized pity as weakness, who had called for hardness against sentiment, finally met a pain that required not analysis but absolute surrender. His brilliant mind, which had dissected morality and proclaimed the death of gods, encountered something it could not solve, could not overcome through sheer intellectual force, the simple, devastating recognition of shared vulnerability between all conscious beings. You understand this breaking point more intimately than you might admit, don't you? You who lie here, exhausted from the relentless labor of thinking, analyzing, trying to solve the unsolvable puzzle of existence through pure mental effort. Your anxiety has been, in part, the mind's desperate attempt to think its way to safety, to analyze every possible danger until you can finally rest in the illusion of control. But there comes a moment when all your sophisticated understanding reveals itself as elaborate defense against the simple, overwhelming fact of fragility, yours and everyone else's. Perhaps your sleeplessness is not a problem requiring more analysis, but a call toward simpler presence. Perhaps the sensitivity you have learned to apologize for is actually your kinship with that beaten horse, with the weeping philosopher, with every consciousness that has ever trembled beneath the weight of existence. Your tears, when they finally come, are not evidence of weakness, but of your refusal to become numb. Your insistence on feeling fully even when feeling hurts. After Turin, Nietzsche descended into 11 years of silence. Not death, but a dissolution of the boundaries between thought and feeling, self and world. Some called it madness, others recognized it as a different kind of sanity. One that had finally released the need to make sense of everything. Tonight, you need not collapse in the streets to access this wisdom. Simply allow yourself to stop trying so hard to understand, to solve, to figure out the impossible equation of your existence. Let the mind's rigid structures soften like snow on warm skin. In this surrender, there is no madness, only the return to your innocent, vulnerable core, finally safe enough to rest. We have walked together through the snow-covered streets of consciousness, you and I, following the footsteps of a philosopher whose mind burned too brightly for this world to contain. The questions that once felt urgent about meaning, about suffering, about the weight of existence itself, begin now to lose their sharp edges, softening like ice in spring water. Even the most profound insights must eventually bow before something more ancient and necessary, the simple, wordless wisdom of a body that knows how to rest. The snow is falling again in Turin, not only in that distant winter of 1889, but here now in the quiet chambers of your mind. Each flake of thought that arrives without demand drifts for a moment in the space of your awareness, then melts before it can crystallize into worry, before it can gather the weight that keeps you awake. The elaborate architecture of philosophy, all those careful arguments about power and fate and becoming, begins to blur at the edges, like words written on paper that someone is gently erasing with warm breath. You have carried so much today, haven't you? The burden of being a creature who notices, who feels, who thinks too deeply for the world's comfort. But here, in this threshold space between waking and sleeping, even Nietzsche must stop and bid you farewell. The man of questions and hammers, of fierce declarations and relentless inquiry, sets down his tools at the edge of your rest. He cannot cross this final border with you. This territory that belongs not to philosophy, but to the ancient wisdom of your breathing body, your trusting heart. Your willingness to finally let go.
Listen now to smaller things, to the almost inaudible whisper of fabric against skin, to the soft rhythm of air moving in and out of your chest. No longer the labored breathing of anxiety, but the gentle tide of a consciousness learning to trust. Your thoughts may still appear, but they arrive now as echoes rather than commands. A worry forms, stretches, thins, as if written on water. You do not need to follow it.
You do not need to finish any story that begins in your mind. Every sentence may trail off. Every question may dissolve halfway through. The boundaries are softening now between self and silence, between the philosopher and his philosophy, between the snow falling outside and the snow falling in your mind.
Covering the day's accumulated burdens, each flake a small forgiveness, a gentle erasure of what no longer serves. Yesterday's regrets are being buried beneath soft white silence. Tomorrow's anxieties dissolve before they can take form. You are not your thoughts. You are the space in which thoughts appear and disappear. You are not your anxiety. You are the vastness that holds it without being diminished. You are not your history. You are the silence that remains when every story stops being told. In this darkness is nothing left to solve, nothing left to prove, and nothing left to become. The snow continues falling in Turin in your mind, covering the cobblestones of consciousness, softening every hard surface.
Softer, into the quiet, into the dark, where words lose their meaning, where philosophy returns to silence, where you are simply breath, warmth, the gentle certainty that for this night it is enough to simply be falling into silence.